Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here with us today. And we have doctoral students from the Institute of Allied Health Professions, and we have which are from the occupational therapy program, physical therapy program, psychology, clinical psychology, and behavioral sciences. So we have a really multidisciplinary so the composition of doctors and doctoral students. And this is part of the multidisciplinary research in healthcare professional online lectures. And this is hosted by the Institute of Allied Health Sciences. And so today, for the students, today we were very pleased to happy that we have Professor Lynette Mackenzie with us today. And Dr. Lynette Mackenzie is a professor in occupational therapy, University of Sydney, Australia. And he has worked as an occupational therapist both in the UK and Australia, very extensive clinical experiences before receiving a PhD in epidemiology and in 2002. And she's the author of the Home Falls and Accidents Screening Tool. I got this information a lot from the website. So if you guys just type in Lynette Mackenzie, you can go.
And then it all comes up, yes.
Yeah, it all comes up. But then I think that's the topic that Lynette is gonna share with us today is it's really both professionally meaningful, also personally meaningful to Lynette. And the following her own cancer experience, she's also researching the needs of cancer survivors, and especially in relation to cognitive issues. And she's gonna talk to us about resilience of health professions today. So without further delay,
I'll share my screen. Hello, everybody. I can't see you though. You've all got your cameras off.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, usual. There's a clap. There's a clap. So let me. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't think. No.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have I think there's a sort of cultural differences. When I was with international meetings, and then everybody has their camera on, but when in Taiwan,
That's right. I know. Share content. That's the one I need, not the other one. So can everybody see my screen? Yes, good, excellent. I'm always reassured when somebody says, yes, I can see it. So hello, everybody, and good afternoon. It's early evening with me because we've just moved all our clocks forward for daylight saving. So I got the time a bit muddled up, but at least I wasn't an hour late. I was just an hour early, so that's okay. So I'm very excited and honoured to be asked to talk to you. So I hope that what I have to say today will be helpful. I've just spent probably 4 hours this morning talking to all my individual PhD students about their projects. I have about 8 PhD students, so I have a fairly clear idea about the sorts of issues that they face. And I've been a PhD student myself, even though it was a little while ago. So I'm sort of very, cognizant of how easy it is for people to get stressed and overwhelmed by their PhD journey. So I thought it was good for us to just pause for a little while and think about resilience for a little while. I mean, resilience is one of these words that's bandied about quite a lot at the moment. Certainly in Australia, it's a very fashionable word. But I'd like us to think about it in terms of our own personal resilience, as well as our professional resilience as PhD students. I think we need both to really sort of benefit So I've also put underneath this heading, thriving or striving. Bit of a play on English words, so I hope you get it. But we can sometimes think that people are born to resilient or not. So that's probably a little bit misleading, because I think we can all learn how to be resilient. Obviously, some people are what we call glass half full types people. And what we mean by that is that you can give two people the same glass of water. One person will think it's half empty and another person will think it's half full, despite the fact it's the same. So I think that speaks to people being naturally optimistic or pessimistic. But thriving is sort of all about having some internal, what's the word I'm looking for? Some internal skills, if you like, in facing your PhD journey. And the striving bit comes when you have to put a bit of effort into gaining some resilience. And I think the two go hand in hand for most of us. I have to put in effort sometimes. I have to really speak sternly to myself sometimes. And at other times it does come fairly naturally. So I think both thriving and striving go hand in hand when we start thinking about resilience. So I've got a little plant there just to remind us that you're at the start of your journey of research as a PhD student. You're not at the end of it. And a lot of people tend to think of their PhD as, oh, when that's over, I won't ever have to think about research again. But let me tell you, it's only the start of your journey as an academic or a researcher. So that's why I've got a little plant there, not a big plant, just to get you to think about that as well in terms of your own journeys. So I'll tell you a little bit about me first, so that you know that I'm qualified to talk to you about all this sort of stuff. So the first thing is that I qualified as an OT in 1981. Whenever I say that to my students, they all laugh, because I then usually follow that up with a question, how many of you were born in 1981? And hardly anybody puts their hand up. So that convinces me that I'm really getting a bit old for all this sort of thing. But at the same time, if I look back over my career, I've had a huge range of experiences in that time. And a lot of those experiences have involved me getting through some pretty difficult times. So the first point I want to make is that I think a lot of understanding about resilience comes from that experience. And I think as younger people, I'm sure you're all younger than me, you will be what's the word? You will have had less experience than me in overcoming adversity. So I think sometimes the resilience stuff builds with experience. So as you can see with those figures, I've had quite a bit of experience. But anyway, the other things that I've experienced, obviously, as a PhD student and any sort of student, is that I have a fairly clear understanding of what the stressors are of being a student. There's always time sort of demands, aren't there? Things have to be done by a certain time. There are loads of applications that have to be done, certainly as a PhD student, whether it's ethics or trying to get money or trying to present things to people within a certain time, getting abstracts off for conferences, that sort of thing. So they're all very familiar stressors. So we sort of face these all the time as PhD students. I've also experienced major changes in practice over all those years, as you can imagine. So some of the things, the big thing is the technological changes to practice, I think, and how much is done in a computerized way now, which was never done before in 1981. In fact, I didn't have a mobile phone then. Can you imagine living without a mobile phone? But, you know, things have changed dramatically, and we have to adapt to all of those changes. So I'm sure you can think of some major changes in practice that you've experienced over your careers as well. Another thing was I moved on my own to Australia from the UK. I just decided to experience another country for a year, and I've been here ever since. So that has sort of tested my inner resources, if you like, to be able to set myself up in a new country. And I'm sure some of you as PhD students may have experienced that if you're international students as well. So that's another sort of piece of resilience in my jigsaw puzzle. And I also started work as an academic in 91. So I've been doing this job for quite a while now. But I started when we were actually creating a new OT program. So there were a whole range of stressors with that. You know, we had to get the program accredited. We had to get recognised by other people in the university that we did actually exist. And we also had to be recognised by other members of the profession locally, because we were sort of in direct competition with the big local OT program. So that caused a whole range of opportunities for me to learn resilience. And then academic practice, I've sort of given you some examples of that, but I have regular bad news from grant organisations. Happens all the time. You work for months to get a grant together and then they say no. You know, and you sort of, all the air comes out of you and you think, oh, can I be bothered to write another one? So you just have to brush yourself down and move on. And then, of course, my cancer diagnosis was a big issue. And this was like something that I couldn't really change. I mean, you can't change a cancer diagnosis, can you? Whereas other things, perhaps you can make a few changes. But really, I was stuck with this diagnosis, and I could either let it overwhelm me or else try to work through it step by step. So I think I'm more of the stoic kind of English personality, you know, to literally just work with it. There was nothing I could change, so there was no point catastrophizing. Just needed to get on with it, you know. So it's interesting. I've had to deal with loss of hair. I've had to deal with lots of effects of chemotherapy, and I was on my own as well when I was doing all of this, so that makes a difference. And you know, that was all. I've been cancer free now for quite a while, and I passed my 10-year anniversary a year ago, so now I'm not on any drugs for cancer. Yippee! But it took 10 years to get to that point. So there were ups and downs, of course, on the way through. And then I think to myself, well, from my point of view, I'm really pleased to talk to you guys, because I think one of my big responsibilities as an older academic is to pass my knowledge on to you guys as the younger generation. So that's one of the things that why I'm so keen on supervising PhD students, so that we can sort of make a difference through them as well. So I think that's quite a detailed thing about me, so I'm sorry if I've bored you. But what I hope to cover in this talk is just to think about the relationship between your personal resilience and what effect that has on your professional resilience. I think the two are very closely linked. And you need a lot of resilience to complete a PhD program. So we'll talk a bit about that. and ways to think about how we can enhance resilience at work. And then thinking about the aspects of thriving, so experiencing resilience and striving, doing things to try and help us be more resilient. And then just thinking about the way ahead. So I hope you can see this all right, but this is a very complicated drawing that a friend of mine did for all of us that were doing a PhD at the time. And I think this gives us a very clear idea of what some of the requirements of resilience are to get through a PhD program. So we start here, it says begin here, and we start in a sea of theory. We start with lots of surfing of the net, looking at the literature, so Literature Bay. And we start in the big city of hope. You know, we're going to do a PhD. We're going to change the world. It's all going to be lovely. And then we start to move along on our journey, and we come across the jungle of hospital authority. I don't know what it's like for you, but in Australia, it can be very, very difficult to get agreement to do research certainly in hospital environments are a lot harder than community environments, and all the ethics and the agreement and the governance and all of that is all part of that jungle. And then you could find yourself on the beach of boring journals, you know, so you've literally got to start going through hundreds of journals, some of which will be excellent and some of which will be really boring. And then you get to this mountain of hypothesis. What is it that I'm trying to do? And that can sometimes be really hard. And especially it can be really hard when you've got a time limit on it and you're under pressure to come up with all these answers really quickly. So then we have the proposal peaks. So you will probably find that you have to write and adapt your proposal several times to get it to a point that you and your supervisor understands. And you have to come through the ethical approval pass. And then there's this track here that says no budget track. So sometimes you have to do that without a lot of funding. And then we have the guru of supervision. So this is where you get to your supervisor and start to develop relationships with your guru and your associate guru. And he's sort of made it very clear that it's not easy. Your study design can be an issue. It can feel like a marathon. You've got all this statistical advice and data analysis to think about, and your data cleaning, and there's raw data going in and something else coming out. And then there's your pilot crash. Your pilot data might not go according to how you'd like it to go. And the where am I fog. I think this is worth just putting on your wall, so when you feel like this, you know it's normal. You know, this is what it's like doing a PhD. It might sound a bit negative, but I think you get there in the end. And you know, there's all these other things like the planes of chapter writing. Writing chapters is a very solitary activity, and getting feedback on your chapter writing is probably something that can test your resilience when you have to keep going backwards and forwards to drafts of what you're writing. So I think it's comes down to an ocean of experience, basically. It's a very complicated process. Doing a PhD is probably the main point to make here. And everybody's PhD is going to be a bit different, obviously. So your journey is going to include a whole range of obstacles. Now, I've put this one in because I think that when you come into doing a PhD, you think you've got to be some sort of superhero, all right? You've got to be able to get out there and do everything right first time, and it's all going to be fabulous, and we're going to finish up with the victories straight away. But in fact, it doesn't always work out like that. And I actually don't think you need to feel like you're a superhero. It's not normal. None of these people are normal. And there's only one woman, which I think's a bit sad, that out of all these superheroes, there's only one woman. But I think you need to be very clear about that your expectations for yourself are quite realistic. None of these characters are realistic. So try not to think of yourself as this person that's going to change the world. You're just on a PhD program, you know? So this is a photograph that I give to all my PhD students, okay? They all said to me, oh, show them the photograph of the rhinoceros, Lynette, if you're talking to PhD students, because I tell them all that they're going to have to develop a thick skin. And that is basically the definition of resilience, really. And one of my students had a rejection from of one of her manuscripts today. And I was speaking to her this morning, and she felt crushed and upset. And I said to her, have you looked at the photograph of the rhinoceros today? And she said she had. So that's good. But it's an important reminder that you do need a thick skin, because you do need to be ready to readapt and change your approach all the time. So I think that's all the pictures I'm going to show you for now. But let's just have a think about what the literature says resilience is. So the first one is that it says that it's the ability to overcome or endure adverse situations, okay? So some adverse situations you're not going to be able to overcome. Like I couldn't overcome my cancer diagnosis. You know, I had to endure it. So not everything will be able to be got rid of easily. Sometimes you have to just work through it. So that's one of the definitions of resilience. The next one is about being able to adapt to stress, which I think we've talked about lots of different types of stress that PhD students are likely to encounter. But some of that will be adapted to because of your individual traits. Maybe you're an optimist more so than a pessimist. And the environment that you're in might also lead to a lot of stress. So sometimes you can adapt within that, sometimes you can't. And the definition of resilience normally includes 3 components. Usually there's some form of adversity. So you can only really know that you're resilient if you have some adversity to deal with. It's not just something that you can say, I'm resilient, and it's never been tested. So it is something that's tested. There's usually some form of mediating process. So there's some way of managing that. And there's usually an outcome which might be completely different to what you think it should be. Sometimes, having had a difficult process in your PhD program, you will suddenly think, I've learned to do something different than I would have learned if I didn't have this problem. You know, so sometimes the outcome is worth it if it means you've got added skills that you didn't have before. So professional resilience, I think, is more about how you handle your PhD on a day-to-day level with your supervisors. So professional resilience is defined as a quality that would enable you to bounce back from adversity So I think bouncing back is not something that we all do very easily. It can't always be delayed. You know, it depends whether or not you've literally got to achieve something straight away or not. And it's about perseverance through difficult times. And it's about how you actually get to return to a state of internal equilibrium or a state of healthy being. So sometimes we can catastrophize things and just keep ruminating on them internally. And that doesn't really help us to be resilient. It probably just makes the problem worse. And sometimes we can perhaps blame ourselves. Why didn't I do it this way instead of that way? And all this sort of thing. And that can also work against you developing some professional resilience. We all make mistakes. I'm sure Ling will admit to having made a mistake in her professional life, and I've certainly made loads. So that's part of the process in many ways. But then we've also got professional self-care. So there are elements of self-care in your professional lives as PhD students you can think about. Like, do you give yourself enough rest? Are you the sort of person that gets up early in the morning and works till really late at night and then wonders why you topple over after a couple of weeks of doing that and get depressed and fed up and anxious? So you do need to engage in some self-care, and you know what works best for you. When I was doing my PhD, I had a friend that used to come round to my house. She was a teacher, so as soon as she finished her work, she'd come round to my house about 4 o'clock and make me go out for a walk with her, because otherwise I would have just sat there and kept writing. So you need to develop what your self-care process needs to be for you. It might be treating yourself to a chocolate bar once you've finished a draft or something. I don't know what it is, but I'm not encouraging you to eat a lot or anything and get fat. But, you know, there will be some form of self-care that really works for you. So I think you need to incorporate your rewards into the process as well as your celebrations too. So that's really important. And the other definition that's down here is adopting strategies to reduce your vulnerability. So think about how a lack of resilience will affect how vulnerable you feel as part of your PhD journey. So we want to reduce that feeling and respond to occupational stresses and life challenges. So we need to help you respond positively to those and maintain your professional values. So you're doing a PhD for a reason, you know, so you have some professional values that I think you have to be true to as part of your PhD program. So when you start feeling vulnerable and feeling overwhelmed by stress, it's very easy for you to throw out your professional values. But it's important that you don't get cynical and negative, all right? Because that's the enemy of resilience. So it's important that you're able to maintain what it is in your heart that you feel you're contributing through doing your PhD. So sometimes it might be a case of just putting some things up on your wall, some quotes or something that you can look at every now and then and think, yeah, this is why I'm doing my PhD. Who cares if that journal editor said no to my fabulous journal article? I'll just send it somewhere else and it will have a higher impact factor and I can go, so there. When it gets accepted. So you need to reframe sometimes how you're thinking about some of these events that you will inevitably come across, I'm afraid to say. So the types of adversity, I think some examples are COVID-19. I think we've all lived through that. We all know what it's like to be isolated. We all know what it's like to be uninspired. by our environments. And fortunately, certainly in Australia, we're coming out of that a bit now, but I'm sure you can all dig deep and remember how you dealt with that situation yourselves. Burnout is another one that's a big issue, and that goes back to your professional self-care, is being aware that you have your limitations and that you need to look after yourself. So that sort of, if you allow yourself to be stressed over a long period of time without any strategies to try and deal with that, you may well get to a point where you feel a sense of burnout. And it's probably better to try and prevent that rather than let it build up and stay there. There's compassion fatigue as well. And I think anybody in an allied health profession feels that at different points in their career, you know, oh, why don't these people just sort themselves out and do what I think they should do? You know, after a while, it can get quite wearing. So, and perhaps if you're dealing with, depends what your topic is for your PhD, but if you're collecting data from particularly demanding people, you may experience compassion fatigue, and that may well actually alter how well you collect your data if you're just dying to get out of there. So I think your study life, a lack of control, a feeling that you can't control what's going on around you. Some things you can't control, like there are some deadlines that you can't control, but you can control how you go about prioritizing your work so you meet those deadlines, you know? So that's important that you need to think about in a situation. This is a barrier. What can I do about my behavior that will help me to meet that deadline? You know, there's always a way around it. So like, if you try and submit a grant in Australia and you're a minute late, it won't go, you know? And I think students, certainly some of my students, out of a class of 100, I've had 36 requests for an extension. And I think, oh, for heaven's sake, surely you've known the date for this assignment since July. Why couldn't you have done something to make sure you could meet this deadline? So it is possible, rather than saying, oh, I can't do it, I need an extension. You know, there are some influences in our lives where there just aren't extensions offered and you've just got to sort it, you know. So I think that's a sign of, you know, getting into more academic work. There simply isn't that same flexibility. And your study life is obviously part of that, as well as all the tasks and processes that you have to go through. Like, we're having all our yearly interviews with students at the moment. So the students then get very anxious about this interview that they're going to have about their progress. Are they going to tell me I'm not progressing well enough? You know, and all the rest of it. So some of the tasks and processes are part of that adversity for PhD students, definitely. So let's think about some strategies. It's not all depression and woe. But so these are some of the mediating processes, and I love this picture because if you take one of those rocks out of that archway, the whole thing will collapse. So some of these mediating processes are dependent on each other, aren't they, if you think about it? So there's your personal qualities, your internal stuff, and the qualities within your workplace to think about. So we need to develop better cognitive flexibility. And by that, I mean that we have a flexible thought processes rather than very rigid ones. Like, if we've got very rigid thought processes where we think it must be done in this way or not at all, then I think you're going to have a lot more difficulty dealing with adversity and therefore developing resilience in those situations. Things like coping strategies. Some people are better copers than others, but sometimes you need to develop your own coping strategies. Like, you know yourself better than anybody else. So you know what makes things better and what makes things worse when you're trying to face things. A sense of self-efficacy is really important. So that's, by self-efficacy, I mean that you get to know that you can determine how you deal with some of these situations yourself, and that you empower yourself to be able to do that. And then, of course, there's self-esteem. If you're feeling very low, it's not going to be easy for you to mediate these processes. Whereas if you can look at yourself and think about yourself in a realistic way that enhances your confidence, that's going to help. And then self-care, as I've said already, how to look after yourself, and mindfulness. So what mindfulness is a way for you to literally think about what is the actual problem here, and to literally just think about it carefully and not to catastrophize what your situation is. Then we've got the workplace. So this is where you are at the coalface of doing your PhD. So it might be around relationships with your supervisors, or where you can get some support. So I'm sure there are groups within the university that you can access where you can gain some support. And there would also be educational opportunities for you within the university. But I'm sure your supervisors, when they're working with you, can help build your skills when you're looking at developing manuscripts, or working out how to do an interview, or practicing different things before you do them. And then that's really important is the informal socialization and relationships. So I've set up a WhatsApp group with all my PhD students. I'm not a member, so they can sit and talk about me and moan about me if they want when they all get together. They assure me they don't, but I bet you they do. And they can just talk to each other, like so-and-so has just put their draft scoping review in, and somebody else is about to start their scoping review. So the two of them can talk with each other about that. Or somebody else has had a go at using NVivo, and I've explained it, but they're still don't want to ask me any stupid questions. So they'll ask one of their peer a stupid question about it. So that's fine. So I think that's really important, that you have a network around you that you can sort of gain support from. So peer groups are excellent at doing that. And I will often just have the whole bunch of them over for dinner every now and then, just so they can meet each other face to face, not on this WhatsApp group. So the socialization things are really important, because then you're treated like a person rather than a PhD project. You know what I mean? It's sort of really important that that personal stuff is there. And then you need to recognize an adverse situation for what it is. So I think your supervisors can recognize those when they happen and give you some sympathy. Like when my students get upset that they've had a paper rejected, I'll tell them to go look at the rhinoceros and then say, look, you've got 2 weeks to lick your wounds, and after that I don't want to hear about it anymore. Okay, so yes, it's horrible to get a paper rejected, because you've put all this work into it and you think it's marvelous and they don't. And it's a horrible situation to be in. But, you know, you do need to recognize that, but you also need to work out a way to get past it so that you don't stay there all the time. And I think that in our PhD programs, we all have an opportunity to make a difference, whether that's to our profession by writing about what we're doing, or with our research participants, that we're giving them something that they wouldn't otherwise experience, or to our peers. We can help individually, we can help each other and build each other up. So I think they're the two main mediating processes with resilience is how you deal with yourself and how you deal with other people. So that's what that one's about. And the outcomes. So we have the adversity, we have the way to mediate it, and then what the outcome is. So I think a resilient person is generally an optimistic person. Okay, so there's a picture there of an oak tree. It's a lovely, nice big oak tree. And if you think about it, there's as much underneath the ground as there is above the ground in terms of the root system of that oak tree. So it's digging deep, in other words. So I think a resilient person feels a sense of professional accomplishment. So you'll get there in the end. Everybody always does, you know, it's just that it feels like it might not happen. You gain a professional identity. So you know what you're capable of, I think, once you become more resilient. And I think that you retain staff, or you can maintain your route through your PhD a lot better if you have a feeling of resilience. You can sort of deal with the curves in the road a lot easier. I think a positive workplace culture is usually the result of people gaining some resilience. And that sort of has a flow-on effect that people feel more resilient in a positive workplace. You can gain a better sense of control, so you can feel more composed and a bit more self-controlled despite there being a stressful situation around. Because after a while, you get to know yourself and you get to know, well, I was able to deal with this 6 months ago, so I'll be able to deal with this too. You know, it's part of the process of gaining experience. I think you become more resourceful as a resilient person, and you're also more committed, I think, about trying to deal with different adversity that comes your way, and it all results in professional and personal growth. So that's another reason for putting the tree there, because we do have to grow both professionally and individually. So one of my last questions is, can resilience be learnt, or is it a trait? Do you have it already, or can you learn it? And I think it's a bit of both. I think we can learn better strategies to improve our level of resilience. And I think it's got something to do with, obviously, your personal internal workings, whether you're stoic or not. But it's also got to do with your expectations and whether or not you've had much experience of getting over some difficult situations. And it's also about whether you tend to focus on your strengths or whether you tend to focus on your weakness. And I think the important thing is to try and focus on your strengths, and then you can do more of what works. So that improves the situation for you. So here's a website for a colleague of mine, does a lot of work with resilience. She's a psychologist, and this is her resilience donut. So there's a little website there. So it's all Australian. But there are personal factors, aren't there, that work. So there's the partner factor. So if you have a significant other, that person's going to help with your resilience, your family, and your friends. So they're probably your backup team. for your resilience. If you read the front of, I'm also marking a PhD at the moment, and I've just read the front page where people write down all their thank yous. And you can see that it's these things, these three things that got that person through their PhD. So that's the personal level. Then there's also the skill level and the education level. So that's what you do to help you improve. And then the community and the work factor, so your environment. So I think we can all analyze something about our own situations using this, and it may well help us develop more resilience, even if we have to work on it, and think about what our strengths are in that donut. What skills do I have? What education do I have? What's my work situation like? What's the community like that I work in? What does that contribute towards my resilience, as opposed to thinking about, oh, I don't have this skill, or I haven't done this course. You know what I mean? You need to flip it and think about your strengths. So my last slide, you'll be glad to know, is this quote. And I think this is really important because it's about working out what you can change and what you can't change. And sometimes this is the epitome of being resilient, I think, is that you can gain serenity to accept the things you can't change. So it's your approach. So if you can't change it, I don't think it means serenity. I don't think it means, let's just bring it on. I think it means that you've just got to think about this situation and not catastrophize it. I've used that word a bit, catastrophize, but just look at it in the eyes and think about what that situation is. And if you can't do anything about it, don't keep trying to do something about it, in other words. And then courage is needed to change the things that you can. So sometimes you need some courage to just literally take a situation and do something differently, rather than repeating your own patterns over and over again. Sometimes you do need to be courageous, change the things you can. And then, of course, it's wisdom to know the difference between those two. So the wisdom, I think, comes with time and experience. Unfortunately for you guys, you may not have had that much experience, but it's there and you will get there. And I think that a lot of people might doubt me when I say that to them, but it's true, you will get there. So I think I'll leave it at that, Ling. Is that, have I spoken for long enough?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Lynette, for sharing your experiences and thoughts on resilience. So I'm just gonna open it up to the students.
Yeah.
Whether students have questions.
Well, or even just comments. It doesn't need to be a question.
Yeah. When students are thinking of their questions, I have a question though. You, in one of your PowerPoint, you talk about resilience, whether it's learned or nature,
yeah.
Right? And then, but however, from your talk, I sort of have a sense that you feel like resilience can be learned.
Yes. I think it's both. I think some people have a predisposition to being more resilient, because they're more optimistic. Do you remember I said at the beginning, you're either a glass half full or a glass half empty type of person? So obviously the resilient person is innately glass half full, But I think even a glass half empty person can learn how to adapt to their situations better and can work on the experiences they've had in the past of adapting to adversity better. So I think it's both. I think I think some people are obviously more easily resilient than other people, yes. But I think you can still learn it. It's sort of like the default position. You know, some people will default to being negative. Just how some people are. And you know, but you can learn to listen to yourself and try to reorganize your thoughts on that.
Right. And then we have Tree asking a question in the chat room. I was wondering, is it Tree? Is that how you say your name? Would you mind just speaking with microphone?
Okay. Yep. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
Yes. Okay. Okay, let me start my video first. Yep.
Oh, hello. I found
Yes.
your question. Is there any measurement to validate someone's resilience?
Yes, I was
Is that
wondering,
your
is there any?
question?
Yes. How to measure the resilience, someone's resilience is because yes, resilience. Everyone has a different resilience, maybe in my understanding.
Yeah.
So, is there any measurement to validate it? Yes.
I think I haven't come across one, but I think that my friend's resilience donut is worth looking at. You know, the donut I showed with the website? Because I think it might be a bit of a mistake to try and put some kind of numerical value onto something like resilience, because it's so individual, as you say. But I haven't come across one. So if you do, you'll have to send it to me.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. I think it's a very qualitative trait. And I'm always worried about trying to measure something that's actually quite individual and very qualitative. I think we might lose something there. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you
But there
very much,
may
Professor.
well be one out there somewhere. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
So, any other questions from the students?
Hello, Professor. Could I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for your speech, Dr. Mackenzie. I'm also very interested in resilience. So I also want to ask a question. The same questions to Tree is the any measurement or assessment using to qualify the resilience, because that we have put the resilience into our psycho-behavioral models and wanted to investigate the resilience effect on the intention or the behavior. However, we in the end we cannot convince our reviewer, so we remove that part. We remove this factor from the beginning. Yeah. So,
Okay.
but the
So
other
what was
article.
the model for? What was the model for?
Me and the other professor from our institute, we have worked on a model to investigate the COVID-19 vaccine intention, vaccinating intention, and we wanted to see if resilience has been part of it, will affect the intention of the student to receive the vaccine. Yeah, but in the end, we are hard to convince the reviewer because they do have a question, is that resilience has so many types, and like professor says, the trait resilient is what we born with, but there are other resilience that could be.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we could be training.
And resilience, if you think about vaccine hesitancy, resilience could actually work towards that, couldn't it? I'm bulletproof.
Yeah.
I don't need a vaccination, you know?
Yes. Yes, because I'm the kind of person that I think I don't usually get sick, and I think I could survive from the vaccine. So that's why I took the vaccine. But at the time in Taiwan, most of people, they're worried about their body condition, that they may not, they may have the severe side effect from the vaccine. So we got a really bad injection rate at the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, but our model suggested that knowledge could help improve the intention. So that's what our conclusion. So, but anyway, we cannot address the resilience importances in this kind of models, which is really pity, I think, because I do think this takes a certain rules to affect the human behavior.
Yes, yeah, and people's view of themselves is quite important, I think. Maybe it's not so much resilience, it's about how people view themselves.
So right now there's still no any well used assessment for the resilience, right?
Don't think so, no. Not for you to get a figure that could work, you know.
But in our other research, we do still use the resilience, but now we focus on the trait resilience, and we use the self-designed questionnaires to identify. Yeah, that's so far so good.
optimism versus pessimism sort of trait.
Yes.
That's probably what you're looking at. So an optimistic person might be more inclined to risk a side effect from a vaccination than a pessimistic person.
Yes.
It's sort of about risk as well, isn't it? Risk taking. Oh, I could sit and talk to you for ages about your project.
Yeah, and I also want follow up this. I also want to ask another question is that, Professor, you have mentioned the mediation process, and you have mentioned one part is the developing the coping strategy. I think this is a bold issue. How could we improve our coping strategy?
Well, I think you need to know yourself quite well to then be able to develop a coping strategy. So, I mean, I'm not sure whether it necessarily needs counselling to do that. Obviously, you know, having an external person to take you through that would enable you to come up with some coping strategies. But I think that it's possible for us as individuals to work out what's worked in the past and what hasn't, and to develop a coping strategy that way. Yeah.
For me, sorry, Professor, I would like to hear you first.
Oh no, I was just rabbiting on. You carry on.
Okay, so I would just want to say that I think myself as a quite resilient person, and for me to trying to find my coping strategies, that we do read a lot of the articles on the internet and try to cheer you up or give you some advice. And then I think to improve our strategy or to find what is useful for you to coping with the difficulties is that you try and then you observe your response to that.
Yes.
So I think that's a very effective way to find a coping strategy.
That's what I mean.
It's just not officially.
Yes, that's right. But thinking about what works for you and then doing it again, doing it more often, you know, what works for you. So it's a bit like what you just said, you know, finding out what, you know, makes you feel better, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I always feel like I was doing the experiment on myself.
Well, perhaps you were.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for your answering. It's very enjoyed about your speech. Very interesting.
Thank you. I wanted to try and make it something that you could all relate to. So that's what I was hoping to do.
So if we can have like any students that want more questions? Oh. So, Jiachun, would you like to? I saw you type in the Julia, right? You type in the chat room. Would you like to?
Yes.
Ask?
I just want to ask what's different between release and positive psychology. I think it's a very
similar. Very similar.
But I think it's one is an activity, one is your thought, your personality. So I think it's a different, some different, right?
So which one's which?
So
is resilience part of your personality?
I think resilience like an activity. If you face something wrong or something happen, you can do anything to recover it. But the positive psychology means, I think, it's your personality, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, obviously, I've spoken a lot about negativity and positivity when I was speaking. So I think that I've probably drawn on some positive psychology to talk through how to deal with adversity. But resilience is kind of the word that's used as a quality to help you do that. So perhaps you're right that, I mean, we're splitting hairs a bit here. So resilience is kind of the state of being that you achieve when you're in the middle of a difficult situation. So your second question was, if somebody is in a bad mood or has negative thoughts, how to improve their resilience? Well, that person just has to listen to their self-talk, don't they? And to be real about what their thoughts are about themselves. So obviously, you know, you're not going to be very resilient if you stay in a bad mood or have negative thoughts. So sometimes you just might need to just allow yourself, like I said with my students, just give yourself a time limit to be miserable. And then after that time limit's up, start working on how to get yourself out of that. Because I think when you're in the middle of it, the last thing you need is somebody telling you not to be in a bad mood if you're in a bad mood, you know. Chances are you'll yell at them and tell them off. So in some ways you have to acknowledge that the situation's bad for somebody and that it's quite normal for them to have a negative thought or be in a bad mood. Say if their paper gets rejected, well, let them be in a bad mood for a couple of days, and then after that, it's when it's sustained over a long period of time that becomes more of a problem, you know. So I think acknowledging something that's bad is really important.
Yes.
You know.
Yes,
we can't just go over the surface and pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
Because that just makes things worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very good theory about thinking. And yeah, it's a very thank you for you to share this experience about a PhD career or something. Yeah, I'm very thank you.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, you've just got to accept that bad stuff's going to happen and it's going to have some kind of effect on you. But it's about how you deal with that and whether or not you have support and all those other things in the list of mediating factors. There are ways that you can address some of this, yeah.
So knowing yourself is a very important thing, right?
I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's important for PhD students to know themselves. to get even to write a PhD, you know? You do need to know yourselves quite well, don't you?
Yeah.
It's not like a something that's separate from you. You become really part of your PhD program, and I think that's important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thank you for thank you the students for all the great questions, and if anyone you can always reach Lynette through email, right? If you
that's right. Just look me up on the University of Sydney website. My email's there.
Right. So today we'll thank Professor Mackenzie to give us a very, very inspirational talk. And then it's very, very sort of related to the experiences that the students are going through, right?
Yes.
So thank you. And so we'll give like applause.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. And I think that Yirong, we need to sort of take a picture. I think
Yes.
All right, okay.
Can Professor Mackenzie, you can stop share your screen.
I'll stop it, yes, sorry.
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
Okay, so how do I switch it off? How do I switch it off? Stop sharing. Here it is. Sorry, it's right there. There we go. I can see you. I can see you all now.
Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Picture. I will take two picture. Now it's one picture. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I will catch it second. And we have a second picture. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Lovely. Can you send me one, Julia?
Okay, Mary.
That would be great.
Okay, and so before the students can go, but Lynette, before you go, next Tuesday,
yes,
3 p.m. That's sort of the same time.
So it will be the same time for me as well.
Yeah, and for occupational therapy students.
Okay, well, you'll need to send me the link again, and I'll be ready.
That's right. Okay, I will.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Now I know how to use it. That'll be fine. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'll go now. I expect you've all got things to do.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Lynette.